Alright, so before we start looking at some of the other things in synthesizers, really quick I want to address something I really talked about is patches. And a couple other things. Patches basically that you've set up the synthesizer some way with some configurations and you've saved that as a patch, like a file, so that you can, pull it up anytime you want with all the settings that you've put together. It's that simple. So however the synthesizer you're working on does that basic concept, it is that simple, and try to keep it that simple. There might be other things that it does that make it more complex, but that's the basic understanding of it. When you hear somebody talk about synth leads or synth pads and synth bass just dealing with bass lines. You're trying to synthesize things that are dealing with bass tones, and it's that simple. And a synth pad is normally something that can be kind of complex. I'm not going to get into that too much, but you can read some about it, and basically most of the time synth pads are background. It's like background music, background chordal structures, pads that have been set up to where they're going to be played as fill or something behind what's going on. And sometimes they can be out front also, and sometimes they can be multiple notes or single notes, harmonies and all kinds of things. But that basically it's dealing with things like that, following the chordal structure of the song, and patches you put together to do that. And the synth lead is basically for working with melody lines. So I just kind of wanted to cover that really quick, and we're off to look at some other parameters on synthesizers. Some things that could be on your synthesizer or as separate plugins. Here's some simple examples. An arpeggiator that is going to, from single note input, create arpeggios, and that you can actually set up any type of arpeggio that you want. You'd have to, if you don't know what an arpeggio is, you might want to read that. But basically that it will set up arpeggios for you on the actual synthesizer. Or it'll repeat things that you're doing on there, that it'll repeat, in that way that you can sometimes set up things to where it will be, it'll repeat one part, and then you can change parameters, and then it'll do it for that next one like a sequencer, but it repeats that. And that's kind of hard to explain without looking at the specific the synthesizer. So I'm not getting into what that one all does, because it might be very different. And a quarter, this thing can be very simple, that it's setting up to where you just hitting one note, which can be really good for, doing pad work, pad synthesis and things like that, to where you're just hitting one note, and it basically, you have formed a chord from this structure, so that anytime you hit a note that it forms that chord. Or that, in key, so if like you're playing C, major C, progression, if you understand any theory, that when you hit this note, it hits a C major. When you hit the D, it's going to hit a D minor. When you hit the E, it's going to hit an E minor, and so on and so forth, and have them set up so all you have to do is just hit one note at a time. So those are a couple things that might be on there. All right, on this synthesizer, the first one, it's got a crossfade on it. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to adjust the levels between the first waveform and the second waveform, and it's going to kind of crossfade them to where, which one's louder than the other one, and going in varying degrees in one way or the other. Tremolo is pretty easy to understand, type of a modulation. Tang, it's more than likely some type of flavor. Anytime you're running a parameter like that, you really want to look up what it is. Drive, obviously, is adding some type of distortion to it. Almost always drive is doing that. If you see drive, this right here is actually, it's actually modulating the frequency of the LFO, which, that can, how they state that on some synthesizers can be very different. But instead of the LFO staying one static frequency, it's actually put a modulator on top of that LFO that you're using to modulate something else. So it's modulating the modulator. So, that's a real simple understanding. And anytime you run into any things like that, you see things like this and it might look very complex. Try to go to one side or the other and see the basic things they're dealing with. Velocity, LFO, key track, we've talked about those things. This one we hadn't. So, what the heck is that? That's doing something else, and I just explained to you what that's doing. And try to approach it that way, one way and then the other way. And hopefully the things that we've talked about, if what we've talked about doesn't describe something that's going on here, then you're just going to have to directly address it, inside the instructions for that synthesizer. Here's another one, character on this Mai Tai. So what the heck is that? So, that's obviously not one of the parameters we talked about. Character could mean all types of things. If you understand what the word character means, that, and trying to describe it to a parameter on your synth might be kind of difficult, right? So, basically anytime you're running into something like that, is that you're going to have to go through these and figure out what the heck that is, So they've got some module on here that's doing something that is not obviously, does not have a name that's directly related to any type of the synthesis that we've talked about. So you're going to have to dig into it. So, and this is a prime example because it's not, it's, the name of it isn't explaining what's going on at all. And the name is not describing any type of synthesis we've talked about. So it's a module. It's a creative module that whoever created that synthesizer felt would be very, useful to you as a sound sculptor. But, so you're going to have to investigate what it does. And I'm sorry that, that's, that can be a fact of life when you're dealing with different types of synthesizers. Here's another example of that. I'm looking at the Zen Add Sub FX. And it's a really cool synthesizer to mess around with. But when you first start looking at it, some of these parameters, they might not be real obvious what the heck that is. So, when you get on here and you're going, okay, well, I can understand LPF, that's a low pass filter, all right? Well, you might not understand that the way they've worded it. IDEL. What the heck is IDEL? Right? Time. What is that time, related to, and how it's related to whatever the other parameters are on there. Velocity sensitivity, velocity offs, all these different types of things that you might run into that as you peruse around the synthesizer, that some of them might not be real descriptive or, with your understanding of synthesis make sense right away. And so that can be very confusing when you get in there and you're going, oh, I'm going to look at this synthesizer, and I start looking at all this. Some of them are going to be very obvious. You got the filter envelope, they're using the ADSR, and have got other parameters on there, that we didn't talk about, that are helping shaping that ADSR. And as you go through and you really start looking at what all the synthesizer can do, that, you're sitting here and, you got phase here. This one, you can actually adjust the phase on here on the voice oscillator so that, when you come into here and you decide that you're going to go ahead and start out with a triangle wave, and then you go back a step and you say, okay, well, I've decided on a triangle wave. Now I go back here and adjust the wave, the phase of that triangle wave, and what all it can do, because, even things like these are harmonics that are, addressing it, and what does that mean? It's a whole lot of these things that you start looking at may not, immediately, jump out at you as something that we've discussed as far as synthesis. And so basically the first thing you got to do is that whenever you're dealing with any of that stuff, is first try to relate everything to the basic synthesis techniques that we've talked about. And try to apply it that way. If that fails and you can't, so you've ran that route of your algorithm, that ain't working. It is not making any sense as far as what I understand about synthesis. So it's doing something else. So then you have to really sit down and figure out what the heck is it doing to sound? What is it doing to that sound or the structure or whatever and things like that? So, that can be, that can be very complex, because even real simple, that, here it shows the voice parameters show voice list, and it's showing a list that, this synthesizer can create all these different waveforms to add them together. So you've got a huge synthesizer that, that's got these other parameters on it, that each one of these are separate as far as the synthesizer is concerned. And then eventually you're going to add some of them together. Is that what that does? Now those three that I created are going to get added together to make this cool sound. Or how does that work, because sometimes those things might not be, easily addressable to, what's going on. Edit kit. What the heck is that? Edit kit of what? So you're going to have to figure out what the heck that means. Does that make sense? You've got a bunch of buttons on here that, directly don't relate to what kind of synthesis we've been talking about. So it's doing something. Somebody's come up with some great idea and they're total genius about how to make it all work. And some of them done really good, right? And some of them didn't. So, you know, that can be a huge problem whenever you're dealing with synthesis. You know, you look at U-He here, you know, and here's a prime example, quantizer. How is that affecting the audio? It's trying to quantize it, but how is it quantizing it? So, you know, you're going to have to read about that. Sample and hold, inverter, it's going to, and a rectifier. You know what a full valve rectifier is? So now you're going to have to figure out what a rectifier is. Lag generators, you know, what the heck is a lag generator? You know, that's not, is that directly related to some type of synthesis we've talked about, or isn't it? Multiplex, so, you know, what is that doing? You know, MIDI. Now you've got MIDI mapping on your synthesizer. So, you know, I go back and watch that video I did on MIDI to try to understand what the heck is going on here. I mean, they're actually dealing with the, you know, MIDI transmits on a plus 5 volt, you know, transmits on a plus 5 volt current, you know, or voltage, I should say. And it's, you know, it's, I think it's like, you know, I can't remember. I think, 0.5 milliamps or something like that. I don't recall exactly right offhand, but it's dependable. So all these things can be doing that. So when you start digging around and you start finding that stuff and you got some new thing on here, this sequencer. Well, sequencer is pretty easy to understand. We talk about sequencers, but what's this one doing? You know, how is it doing that? It might be doing that in some real weird way that, you know, isn't real obvious at first, you know. You might look at it and go, well, I got a pretty good understanding of what a sequencer is right now, but I don't have any idea what that's doing. So you're going to have to go through it just like any other module, like this module here, and one thing at a time, really read about what that's doing with sound. And it's why I really pushed you to understand about sound. And, you know, on this channel, I've addressed sound in a lot of different ways, and I've tried to keep it real basic. And a lot of things you'll be dealing in audio engineering real basic, because synthesizers are a huge part of that. And I think I've addressed most of the issues that you would need to understand on this channel if you went through and watched them. But there's, you know, I mean, it's, you know, it's going to take a little while for you to get there. But the more you understand that, the easier this stuff's going to be to understand. So, I mean, here's another one, snappy. You know, snappy what? I mean, what is snappy? Snappy's not a parameter, dude. You know, I mean, it's just not. I mean, you know, snappy isn't a mathematical parameter to create sound. So, you know, you're going to have to go back and look at that. That's this module. Figure out what the heck are they talking about? What do they mean, snappy? You know, and I mean, you can run into things like that a lot. That whoever created some synthesizer thought that was a really good idea. That, you know, it might be, but it might not be, and you might not want to use it, or you might find uses for it. That's why there's so many different synthesizers out there, because, you know, that because sometimes, you know, that, you know, a lot of times people just won't understand sound, and so they'll start doing things that make sound really basic and do some real basic things that aren't really technical. Does that make sense? So, you know, and I know that's kind of a hard thing to get over, but the better you understand sound, the better is you're going to be able to look at some parameter and say, quantizer. I understand what quantization is. What is that doing? How's it doing it? All right, it's doing a good job of quantizing, and I can route that over here. Or it's doing a shit job. The algorithm sucks, and it's not doing a good job, and it just makes a mess. It becomes some kind of noise thing that screws up my sound. You know, it's a toy for somebody who doesn't understand what sound is. And then at that point, you can make a decision whether or not that's a useful tool or garbage. You know, because, you know, not every parameter you'll find on every synthesizer is a really functional tool. They're snappy. I don't know. I mean, you might find a really great use for snappy, and you might not. You might. Does that make sense? The better you understand sound, the better you understand whether or not snappy parameter is going to be something you want to use. So I didn't mean to insult nobody or blow up anybody's bubble, but, you know, that can be a reality. So, you know, any one of these modules you're dealing with like that you have to approach it that way, you know, and one module at a time. So I hope I made that kind of clear. And, you know, we didn't really address all of them because, you know, that could be kind of ridiculous. I think we will in some of these other videos, but I just kind of wanted to address that so that, you know, that's out there, so that when you're looking at these things, that you start approaching that module just like any other module I've told you, so that you can understand what's happening. And if you're even messing with any of these things, you have some kind of understanding what's going on with sound and those basic things anyway. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and we're going to do some sound sculpting in the next video, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace, hope, love.